and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting Microsoft to this session this morning. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be part of this esteemed panelists this morning. Yeah, and I really enjoyed the talks that Dr. Michael shared with us just now. I like to start with saying that data, artificial intelligence, and this digital platform has been accelerating the pace of the fourth industrial revolution, and we see business and economic disruptions actually happening in this day and age. But what COVID-19 has done, as mentioned by the minister, that it has brought forward and forced upon us a new normal ahead of time, and that creates this sense of urgency. So this morning, to be aligned with this topic, happy to share my thoughts why ethics, where transparency and honesty is really a part of a business issue today, just like cybersecurity and so on. Now, before I start, I'd just like to level set the understanding of what digital means, because I have found that if I talk to different people, they kind of have a different understanding what digital is. So for the purpose of my session this morning, I'd like to maybe define what digital is. And if you look at many analysts, when they talk about digital technologies, it's a platform, right? That's why they refer it as a digital platform, a digital, a platform economy, and so on. And what digital platform is, it is a combination of very impactful technologies, right? It starts with social and mobile, which really has changed the way we communicate and collaborate, as mentioned by the previous speaker just now, whereby how he leverages on social and mobile to really transform his organizations. But the use of this platform creates huge amounts of data that that Tan Sri Jamaluddin mentioned about how this can really help businesses. But when you process huge amounts of data, you need new ways to process it. So that's why big data becomes a very important methodology of processing data. And all of this was not possible if it was not due to what we term as the hyperscale commercial cloud, or just cloud for short, whereby you have these few companies which runs infrastructure with millions of computers. And we have done a study that if you run a data center with 1,000 servers compared to 100,000 servers, you get a 10 times reduction in cost on a per server basis. And that is why today you don't need to be a big companies to afford very powerful computing, right? Now with Internet of Things, when sensors and actuators are connected to the internet, this creates even huge amounts of data, because now machines generating data is actually being stored, right? And that is why in today's world, 2020, we are talking about 44 zettabytes of data, and 1 zettabyte is 10 to the power of 21, right? And in 5 years' time, you're talking about 135 zettabytes of data, and this is kind of mind-boggling. Now, with the reduction in cost of processing and storage and huge amounts of data, that's artificial intelligence. 3 things I like to highlight before I leave this slide is that the first thing is that it is a mashup of technologies, not only one specific technology here. When you talk about digital platform, it's this combination. And if you take out one of these components, you lose the disruptive effect of this technology. Second point is that a lot of people are concerned about cost, but really look at what really is happening and why this didn't happen maybe 30, 40 years ago, because most of this technology is old, right? AI is available in 1950s, for example, right? It is about the democratization of technologies. If you think about your mobile phone today, right, it is 3 times more powerful than a computer which brought Apollo 11 to the moon, and yet it costs so cheap. And not only that, you do not have to be a rocket scientist to use it, right? A 2-year-old probably can use the smartphone better than I can. And the final point I want to highlight is that all of this is enabled by the internet. The moment you take out internet itself, it actually disrupts this whole thing. It doesn't work anymore. Just think about it, right? If you turn off if you turn off your 4G, LTE, and your Wi-Fi, what does your iPhone become? A Nokia 3270, right? Which is kind of useless in this day and age. And this is why 5G is important, because it creates this glue on this and connectivity to these powerful platforms, and also why cybersecurity is becoming a challenge in today's day and age. But that's another issue. Just to show how this works for a company like Grab, which is kind of a digital company that we are very familiar with. Think about how it works, right? Our mobiles are generating huge amounts of data, acceleration, geoposition, taking photos, maybe feedback on the social media and so on. And when you ask for a car, then the passenger will then be served by Grab on the cost. Grab calculates the shortest distance or the cheapest distance, whatever, evaluates who's the closest car, and then if you accept it, then you get the car within a certain period of time, and they can calculate all this on the fly. Now, if you look at how they do this, right, it is this combination of digital platform or digital technologies forming this whole platform, right? You use your mobile phones, drivers and passengers. It has to then, deal with the social feedback that is what your smartphone is processing and creating. The Internet of Things, your cameras, your GPS, your accelerometer. Now they have to process huge amounts of data, like terabytes of data per hour, and they need to use big data techniques. And if it's not because of the hyperscale cloud computing, which brought the cost of computing down, a small company like Grab, which started with nothing 5 years ago, right, now is disrupting a whole industry. It was just not possible. Now with artificial intelligence, they are able to automate all this, and this is how they become competitive in this world, able to even dislodge Uber, right? And just to have a sense on how rapidly these companies are, you think about Uber, they became a $40 billion company in just about 5 years, right? Impacting the whole transportation industry around the world, in a very disruptive manner, right? In a very short period of time. So this is the kind of digital companies that we deal with today. Now, if we step back, what is really happening here? I think that Google summarizes this in a very nice way. It does two things. One, power is now with consumers, not companies. And that is why the way companies need to engage with consumers are different. We need to engage them early, right? And the second point, which I think was hinted by Tan Sri just now, is that small things can have big impacts. And why small things can have big impact? Because technology has been democratized. So you don't need to be a big company to have this, access to these powerful technologies. But then you can leverage your agility, right, to really disrupt the market. So agility is important, whether you're big or small company. Yeah. But coming back to the ethics and integrity, I think this is where we need to understand that in today's world, right, the consumers, even citizens, have actually more power, all right? And when we talk about ethics, it is a system of accepted moral beliefs that control behavior. That therefore, in many ways, businesses today must interpret this from the customers and their employees' point of view, and behave accordingly to meet their expectations. Now, this is a very important point, because if you look at today's, if you try to buy Lazada, they try to get you to give 5 stars, right? And that's important because other people will start to look at the reviews to see whether they can trust this company or otherwise. Now, if you think about a digital company, they normally leverage on these two-sided network effects. And if you're interested, I would recommend this book called Platform Revolution, where the question is, how can I create more demand when I create more supply, right? And the way they do this is that they look at this and leverage on data and AI to drive this. So for example, in case of Grab or Uber, it says, if I give more drivers, therefore I get more geo coverage, I get less driver downtime, I lower the fares because of competition, and I get faster pickups, and that creates more demand. And I need to look at this in near real time to be able to then balance with this. Do I incentivize the drivers or do I incentivize the the customers, right? And they also have to look at the negative digital feedback loops. Like if there were too much drivers and too little passengers, then you will get drivers dropping off, the geo coverage becomes less driver downtime, more driver downtimes, the fare starts to increase and you get less demand. So you have to monitor this positive and negative feedback loops in near real time. But one of the things that I think we have to realize is that poor ethics, or for example, being opaque, being dishonest, is actually a very powerful negative feedback loop that companies need to monitor. And I think if you look at these companies, what they have to do is they have in near real time to transform their products and then to engage their customers in a way that they can create this positive vicious cycle which grows their business. But what we do not see in the background, and I think it was alluded by Datuk Michael just now, is that you also need to make sure that your employees can also drive this, rapid transformation and response to the customers. And on top of that, leverage on machines, AI, and so on to really optimize this whole operations, where companies today need to have two personalities, run the business on one side, matured business, you need to run it in the most efficient way. But then you need to also have another personality where you allow creativity, you allow people to take risks so that they can create the next S-curves, try 10 things, maybe 9 fails, but 1 becomes success, but that becomes your next S-curve. Yeah. Now back to ethics itself. If you look at companies today, I mentioned how negative ethics or poor ethics becomes a big negative digital cycle. Look at how Grab does it. So if you remember, very recently there was this complaint by a passenger where they say the driver was indecent and asked the person questions about her personal questions and so on. But you look at how Grab responds to it. Very quickly they say that a Grab spokesman said that, there is actually a get emergency help button that perhaps the passenger was not aware of. And on top of that, they do this because they have an underlying set of principles on the, or code of conduct where the drivers are supposed to follow. So they could actually very, very quickly respond to this particular negative digital feedback loop. And sometimes it's not easy. In a case where they were asked to actually change the code of ethics because they suspended some drivers that was found to be frauding the customers, they actually stood by their code of ethics. And I think this is important for us to have this principled approach in terms of building the trust with customers. So one of the things that in today's digital world, you need to be fast in responding to any concerns by the customer itself, right, from an ethical perspective. And you need to use the same digital platform to respond to them on this. You cannot just put it on a newspaper and so on, right? You need to respond because you need to stop this vicious cycle, the negative vicious cycle, or which spirals, the viral effect of bad news, right? And you need to have a principled approach rather than having an approach of responding in an ad hoc manner. So this principled approach is very important for most organizations. You must have a principle in how you run your business. Just to share with you, there are many principles out there, to enable, especially in this AI-enabled world. In Microsoft, we have a set of 6 principles. One is fairness, to make sure that when we deal with customers, we are fair. We don't make decisions based whether you like or do not dislike the face of the person. Secondly is reliability and safety, to make sure that if something goes wrong, it always falls back to a safe situation. The third is actually privacy and security. I think a lot of was mentioned about privacy just now and why it is important in this new world, because things can go viral. But security is very important to make sure that the data that we have is actually very well managed and very well protected. Yeah. And the fourth thing is inclusiveness. That is to make sure that as much as possible, most of our potential customers are actually being covered. That's why Grab now have services even outside the Klang Valley and so on. But underlying all this is back to this thing called transparency and honesty. It's very fundamental across the board. And finally is accountability. That is, if something goes wrong, the organization, the leadership must be accountable. The people who develop the platform, the people, and then address it accordingly. And that's how you build the trust to our customers. So in conclusion, I think the first thing is digital transformation is no longer an option. I think all organizations need to digitize themselves to stay relevant and succeed in this new world. Secondly, is that consumers today have more power, and therefore they have higher expectations for company to be ethics, inclusive of being transparent and honest. And thirdly, I think we should take a principled approach, have a principle ready, so that based on this, you can monitor and respond very quickly so that you stop that negative feedback due to bad feedback that may come from the customers. With that, thank you very much.